The noise of the wind outside the window seemed like a threatening harbinger of trouble, and no one could have guessed that all this feeling of trembling in the air was not just a strange premonition, but a real response to events approaching with frightening speed. The weather that day changed with lightning speed. The morning sunny haze gave way to thunderclouds, and by midday the sky was cut by flashes of lightning, as if nature was trying to warn of the impending disaster. In Hollywood, no one paid attention to the vagaries of the elements. Everyone here was accustomed to the quirks of the climate, and the storm sometimes became the background for another filming masterpiece. But for those who were close to Keanu Reeves, this day will go down in history, not as a successful shot at all. It will become a dark boundary dividing life into before and after. Keanu usually didn't complain about being tired, although his schedule had long resembled a mad race. Continuous meetings, flights, work on scripts. If someone had dropped in on him that day, they would have seen him, slightly frowning, looking at his phone as if he was waiting for an important call, or on the contrary, deciding to dial someone's number himself. The energy in his movements was restrained and nervous, which is unusual for a person who is usually considered calm and balanced. None of his loved ones guessed that at that moment, a struggle was going on inside Keanu. He had information about impending troubles, and he did not know what to do. On the one hand, his heart told him that he needed to urgently intervene, warn, help, but on the other hand, he understood that everything could become even more confused, because this was not a simple, everyday situation, but a treacherous series of interconnected events, where one wrong step could lead to disaster. A few days before, Keanu had received an unexpectedly disturbing message from an old friend who worked as a stuntman on risky productions. The friend claimed that people had been spotted acting suspiciously near one of the film sets, and there was every reason to believe that they might be involved in dangerous activities. At first, Keanu brushed off the rumors, thinking that they looked like another paranoid story that often surfaced among technical staff. However, the information was soon confirmed. The producers also suspected something, and the studio's security service began a secret investigation. And although the matter was not officially publicized, Keanu felt a strange anxiety that made him look at his phone more and more often, as if expecting important news. Then an event occurred that brought back memories of a past that Keanu was reluctant to recall. During a night shift on a related project, a man was seriously injured, and the press hinted in their reports that the cause was negligence, or perhaps even someone's malicious intent. Everyone's ears were buzzing that in reality, everything looked far from accidental. Keanu, who had performed many dangerous stunts himself and knew the value of safety on the set, became even more alarmed. Something in the details of the incident seemed implausible to him, too strange a sequence of breakdowns, unforeseen errors. Was someone deliberately trying to disrupt filming or eliminate someone? However, there was no evidence. The active studio team responded only with general phrases, and the victim himself was in the hospital, unable to speak. As a result, Keanu could only wait for events to develop, but the feeling that the threat was still brewing did not go away. That very day, when a thunderstorm was in the air, Keanu could no longer concentrate on ordinary matters. Questions were spinning in his head. Would someone's life be the next target if there really was an organized group behind all the strangeness? Who of his acquaintances could be in danger but did not suspect it? Perhaps everything would be easier if he received direct confirmation or at least heard a report from the security service. But there was an uneasy silence around. And suddenly a thought flashed through his mind. What if he needed to call some people himself to warn them? But warn them from what? Without concrete facts and evidence, the warning would sound like empty panic. Doubts tore his soul apart. Late in the evening, when the storm was beginning to disperse, Keanu's phone suddenly rang. The number of the stuntman with whom he had shared his guesses appeared on the screen. Keanu, nervously, answered immediately, but in the receiver he heard only intermittent sounds, similar to interference or the noise of the wind. A few seconds passed and the connection was cut off. Attempts to call back were unsuccessful. His friend's phone was unavailable. All this only fueled the feeling that something was going wrong. Keanu waited 5 minutes in unsuccessful attempts to get in touch again. His heart was pounding, as if signaling that he needed to act. And so he decided to call another person who could know details about where his stuntman friend was now and what was happening in the studio pavilions. It soon became clear that the friend was involved in an urgent late-night stunt rehearsal before a key scene. Allegedly, the crew, under pressure from the producers, was planning something big to make up for the schedule. Everyone was in a hurry, which meant the likelihood of a mistake was multiplied many times over. Keanu sensed that there was something hidden here. Why would they do night stunts in such weather, and without proper precautions? Could it be connected to the series of strange breakdowns that had already happened? Intuition screamed, "I need to go there in person and check everything out." But at the last moment, the actor remembered his workload the next day and realized that it was unlikely that he would be allowed onto someone else's set at such a time without unnecessary questions, and his very presence could attract a bunch of reporters. He hesitated until the time approached a critical point. Several hours passed in anxious anticipation of news. In the end, Keanu decided to contact another friend who had once coordinated complex fight scenes on The Matrix, and thanks to this had acquired contacts in many stunt teams. But he was out of reach. It was night time, the phone was unavailable. Feeling that time was running out, Keanu feverishly reasoned about what he was more afraid of: being ridiculed for groundless suspicions or facing real trouble. And then, closer to midnight, a phone call rang in his apartment. That same incoming call, which was no longer from someone he knew, the number was identified as unknown. A second of hesitation, and Keanu pressed the accept button. The voice on the other end of the line was excited but quiet, as if the person speaking was afraid of being overheard. It was a young woman, a stunt coordinator from the night set. She did not introduce herself, but briefly explained that things were not going according to plan, that Keanu's friend had disappeared from the rehearsal space half an hour earlier, and that she had heard someone in one of the rooms climbing into the electrical room, possibly trying to sabotage the equipment. She begged Keanu, "Call him, maybe you have him. I can't find him here, and the scene starts in just a couple of minutes. I'm afraid this is all going to end badly." The actor, jumping up, said that he couldn't get through to his friend and offered to call the police or at least the head of studio security. But the woman said that everything was happening too fast and they didn't want to panic because the producers had a lot of money at stake. Then the line went dead. Keanu felt a chill growing inside. He knew for sure that several signals indicated an impending tragedy, but he had no direct way to intervene from a distance. An agonizing minute dragged on endlessly before he finally dialed the familiar number marked Stuntman's personal phone. And this time the beeps started. He listened to them beat in the silence, and the thought pulsated in his head: answer, answer. It seemed that at any moment he would hear the tired but reassuring voice of a friend on the other end. But when the connection was established after a few beeps, the voice heard not a friend, but a stranger. He said nervously, "Keanu, oh my God, you're calling." And at that moment, the noise, shouts, and rumble in the background eclipsed almost everything. Keanu could only make out fragments of phrases, among which were repeated: he's there, wires, now everything. After which a shrill crackle, a loud bang, and a terrible hissing sound appeared in the receiver, as if something had shorted out in the communication system. A second later, the connection was cut off completely. Keanu's heart was beating like crazy, and his temples were ringing with pain, the understanding that something irreparable had happened. He tried to call back again, but the phone showed subscriber unavailable or call interrupted. He dialed other numbers of studio contacts. Some of them had no signal, some did not answer, and some in a hurry said that they knew nothing. The passion of guesses swept away the remnants of calm. Perhaps a fatal accident had happened during rehearsal, or maybe not even an accident, but a planned one. Where is his friend now? Is he alive? Is there a way to get to the place before it's too late? Keanu almost jumped out of the apartment, intending to throw himself behind the wheel and rush there. But he understood that the set was on the outskirts. It would take about an hour to get there, And who and how would he help if the official services should have responded by now? The anxiety grew with each passing minute. Keanu didn't know what to do, and then he remembered another person with access to the internal communication channels, a producer's assistant to whom he had once done a favor. Desperately, he dialed the number. The person on the other end of the line, breathing heavily, said, "We have an emergency here. They're not disclosing the details, but I heard that there was an explosion in the electrical room. People died. I'm not sure who exactly, but it seems like your friend might have been nearby. Sorry, I can't help you now. Everything is disconnected." Keanu felt as if he had been burned. The last words sounded like a death sentence. At that moment, all doubts dissipated and he realized the tragedy he had sensed had become reality. He couldn't believe that half an hour ago he had been expecting a call from his friend, and now he was hearing that people died. He sat down on the floor, breathing heavily, feeling guilt flare up in his chest. After all, he knew something was wrong, but he didn't take any decisive steps. The thought pounded in his head, maybe if I had gotten there on time, but it was too late. The worst thing was that he had no exact information whether his friend or someone else had really died. Could it be that everything had ended at the very moment when he was almost through? Time stretched out and Keanu sat in complete shock, unable to move. Lightning flashed around him and the rain intensified again, although it was already well past midnight. It all looked like an ominous set for a tragic film, but unfortunately, it was happening in reality. Towards morning, he finally managed to contact one of the employees of the production department. He told him through tears that the explosion in the control room had caused a powerful fire, and several people were seriously injured. 2 died on the spot. The identification has not yet been completed, but there is reason to believe that among the dead is the very same stuntman, Keanu's friend. At that moment, the actor's heart seemed to skip a beat. But the most mysterious thing, judging by the testimony of eyewitnesses, shortly before the explosion, someone tried to get people out of the building, shouting for everyone to leave because the wires were mined there. As it turned out later, the alleged attacker opened the wiring and caused a short circuit. This means that everything really was planned. The police already had a version that this was connected with a competitive struggle or an attempt to disrupt an expensive shoot. Keanu understood that everything he feared so much was not his imagination, but the knowledge that his friend could have fought to the last moment to save his colleagues only intensified the pain. Soon the final confirmation came. Among the dead was indeed a close friend of the actor, the same one who sent him an alarming message, who promised to call again to discuss everything. And before the last minutes of his life, he probably only managed to dial Keanu's number, but did not have time to say anything because the fatal explosion occurred. The rumor about this immediately leaked to the press, and journalists began to ask whether the actor had really heard the last words of his friend. Keanu himself could not find the strength to comment on anything until the very end. He was in a state of shock and silent despair. Only a couple of days later, someone he knew said that Keanu received the last call before the tragedy, but did not have time to talk about anything. This phrase hung in the air, causing a wave of guesses and gossip. Of course, the media began to blow the story out of proportion, inventing details that didn't exist. Articles appeared like, "What did Keanu Reeves tell him in response to his last call? Is the content of their conversation known?" Although in fact, there was no full conversation. In an attempt to find a sensation, reporters took on any speculation, made up legends about how Keanu allegedly transmitted some encrypted message or heard fatal phrases from a friend. But those who were closest to the situation claimed that all he heard was noise, short shouts, and a terrible crackling of interference. The actor himself did not want to discuss anything publicly for a long time. He simply grieved and tried to understand how quickly a person's life can end out of the blue, and at the hands of merciless criminals or madmen who want to disrupt a project. Weeks passed and a picture began to emerge. Law enforcement agencies confirmed that the explosion was not accidental, and the investigation was in full swing. It turned out that the stuntman really did try to warn his colleagues about the possibility of arson or fire, but not everyone had time to hear the signal and leave the room in time. The details were so heartbreaking that a gloomy mood reigned in studio circles for a long time. Much was hushed up so as not to damage the reputational image of a big film project, because huge amounts of money and influential people were involved. But for Keanu, neither ratings nor budgets meant anything these days. All he thought about was why he hadn't intervened earlier, why he hadn't gone to the set, why he hadn't tried to disrupt the night rehearsal. And returning mentally to that ill-fated call, he asked himself every time, what if I had managed to say something, warn, or ask my friend to leave? Alas, the phone signal was cut off too early. Despite all the pain, Keanu still found the strength to come to a closed memorial ceremony for the victims. There he met pale and confused members of the film crew who could not take their eyes off him, understanding how hard a blow it could be for a man who did not have time to say his last words to a friend. Some came up to him, apologizing for not taking the threat seriously that night, and he just nodded silently, trying not to blame anyone. Perhaps this is Keanu's nature. He never liked to stir up conflicts, preferring to look for something good in people, even after the most terrible events. But this time, the pain was too deep in his heart to quickly find consolation. The public then tried to find out more details from the actor several times. Did his friend say something important? Did he leave a message? But Keanu answered all the questions with the same thing. We didn't have time to talk. The connection was broken. He didn't want to admit that he felt a painful sense of guilt for the fact that he could have foreseen this tragedy, but didn't. He only hinted that perhaps one should be more attentive to premonitions, to the little signals that life sometimes sends. And even if they are not confirmed by facts, it is better to be on the safe side than to regret later. But alas, the sad reality is that no one can turn back time. A few more months passed. The investigation progressed slowly, the charges changed directions, and eventually the case turned to some murky crime involving extortion and financial fraud. The studio did not want a public scandal, trying to hush up the facts. But as usually happens, people who have dedicated themselves to the risk on film sets have already begun to talk about how easy it is to forget about safety in the pursuit of money, and how sometimes in such conditions evil is born, ready for any sabotage. Keanu, trying to support the families of the victims, participated in a quiet charity initiative, transferring funds for the treatment of the survivors and helping the children of his deceased friend. Only those closest to him knew how deeply and personally he experienced this loss. There were rumors behind the scenes that from time to time Keanu suddenly takes out his phone and looks at the list of recent calls, where his friend's number is still listed. As if trying to make sure that all this was not a bad dream, he sees the same entry, missed call, 0001, a short number symbolizing everything that was not said. People in the know say that he does not delete this contact. He cannot bring himself to do so, although he understands that his friend will never answer. For him, this is a memory, a reminder that sometimes the most important and necessary word may not have time to be said. But they had been friends for many years, sharing moments of glory and moments of grief, and always believed that they still had a lot of time ahead of them. When the story became public, journalists tried to embellish it one after another, saying that the friend's last phrase was, "I did it all," or "get out of there," and even attributing dramatic words of response to Keanu. But in fact, the reality turned out to be much more ruthless. No heroic stage lyrics, only a short, indistinct plea for help and a crackling line. Later analyzing the recordings, experts concluded that the explosion occurred literally a few seconds after the connection, so there was nothing to say or listen to. That is, the actor really heard the last moments, the last cries, but what exactly was said remains a mystery, hidden by the noise. Perhaps the friend just wanted to warn, trouble is near, call someone, or maybe he wanted to say goodbye, but no one will ever know the truth. The question remains unanswered. What did Keanu Reeves say on his last call before the tragedy? The answer is bitterly simple. He didn't have time to say anything. Not a word of comfort, not a cry of "get out of there." Nothing. Because in those tragic seconds, the connection was interrupted, cutting off both the voice and the life on the other end of the line. But it was this silent ghost call that went down in Hollywood history as one of the most terrifying and sad episodes, showing how fragile human life is, especially where insidious plans intersect with the mad race for blockbusters. Film companies can rework scripts, change directors, rewrite contracts, but no amount of advertising can drown out the real pain. Keanu will long carry the scar of loss in his heart, and the thought of whether he could have saved his friend if he had arrived earlier, called earlier, or insisted on canceling the rehearsal. When all these facts came together, the public no longer doubted. The tragedy that had happened reminds us once again how important it is to cherish every moment and every opportunity to warn, protect, call. Sometimes a couple of minutes can decide whether a person will survive or not. And the question is not who is to blame, but that we ourselves are obliged to be more attentive to alarm signals. This is the main idea that the actor's colleagues often repeated after the tragedy. Even in his rare comments, Keanu spoke about the same thing without loud calls, but with a quiet conviction that we are responsible for each other. Today, looking back, one can only regret that the last call was full of static and hopeless crackling, and not the words that could have led people out of the building and saved their lives. Perhaps history would have turned out differently if the studio had not hidden the problems, if the police had learned about the strange damage to the equipment earlier, if Keanu's friend had found a safe way to convey the truth about the planned sabotage. But events turned out the way they did. And now a painful secret will forever remain. What was said in that very second before the explosion? Did the friend say anything to the actor, or did the scream freeze on his lips, dissolving into oblivion? Such stories make us take a different look at the loud world of Hollywood. It seems like an oasis of glitter and illusions, but sometimes it hides dramas that you can't always show on the screen. This case shows that even famous actors, surrounded by attention and fans, are not immune to personal nightmares where loved ones die, and they remain in the role of helpless witnesses to someone else's thirst for profit or evil intent. Keanu, with all his kindness and popularity, also found himself in a situation where he could only helplessly listen as his friend's life faded before his eyes, albeit through the phone. However, there is a ray of light in this darkness. Colleagues and followers of the deceased stuntman started a large-scale campaign for stricter safety standards on set. Keanu supported them as best he could. He donated funds, gave an interview where he emphasized, "No amount of money is worth risking life, and we all need to remember that." Since then, many studios have been more attentive to warning signs, although it is difficult to completely eradicate negligence and insidious conspiracies. Perhaps thanks to the sacrifice of several people, such cases will become less frequent. After all, life should not end because of someone's criminal plans and the indifference of others. This is how the story of The Last Call ends, which will forever remain in the memory of Keanu Reeves and everyone who was there. Sometimes fateful moments do not end with loud words, but are drowned in the noise of interference and terrible rumble. But the main message is buried in them. While we have the opportunity, we need to talk. We need to take care of each other, not put off caring and raise the alarm in time. And let this tragedy remind us how important it is not to miss the chance to lend a helping hand. After all, everything can end at any second. If this story touched you and made you think about the price of friendship, the value of safety and life, if you felt the emotional intensity that the heroes had to endure, support this material with a like, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Perhaps your voice or story can save someone from a fatal mistake or warn them of injustice, because we never know whose call may be the last and what kind of inexpressible goodbye may be hidden in the noise of a broken connection. Take care of yourself and your loved ones, and remember that sometimes one simple conversation, One warning gesture, or just a couple of minutes, can decide fate and give a chance for salvation.